Mary's lungs burned as she ran, her shoes slapping against the linoleum. Elena's scream still echoed through the halls, "Mary! He's here!" She didn't think. She couldn't. Every step carried her closer to the sound of gunfire, closer to her brother, closer to the moment she had dreaded and prayed would never come. Her body wanted to stop, to fold into the shadows like the other students hiding in classrooms, but something deeper pushed her forward. Guilt. Love. Fear. A voice inside screaming that if she didn't face him now, she would lose him forever, and worse, countless more would die. The hallway opened before her like a nightmare. She saw Father Michael first, slumped against the wall, his cassock soaked crimson. Elena crouched over him with her hands pressed desperately against the wound. Dust from the shattered wall drifted in the air like smoke. And then, Jonah. Her brother stood a few feet away, weapon raised, his chest heaving, his face twisted with rage and confusion. His eyes snapped to hers the moment she entered. Time froze. "Mary," he said, his voice breaking, half relief, half warning. She stopped dead, her heart pounding so hard it felt like her ribs would shatter. She wanted to run to him, to hold him, to drag him away from the weapon in his hands. But her legs were trembling, her throat locked tight. She forced the words out anyway, her voice cracking, "Jonah, stop." His eyes flickered with pain, recognition, then fury. "You shouldn't be here." "I have to be," she said, louder now, her voice shaking but steady enough to cut through the ringing in his head. "Because I let you get this far. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. And now look at what you've done." Jonah's face twisted, the barrel of the gun wavering. Don't you dare blame me. You know what they did. You know what this place is. I know what you're doing," she cried, tears streaking down her face. "And it's not justice. It's not truth. It's murder." The word hit like a slap. Jonah flinched, his hand trembling. For the first time, the weapon sagged slightly. His eyes darted between Mary and Elena, then back to Mary, as if searching for an anchor in the storm tearing through him. Mary took a step closer, her hands out, palms open. "Please, Jonah. Look at me. Not them. Not the past. Me." His breath came ragged, uneven. The gun trembled in his grip. His lips parted, a sound escaping, half sob, half growl. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I do," Mary said, her voice breaking. "Because I've carried it too. Your anger. Your pain. Your silence." She pressed her trembling hand against her chest. "But I won't carry your blood. Not theirs. Not Father Michael's. Not Elena's. And not mine." Jonah's knees buckled slightly. His face twisted, torn between rage and collapse. And then, in a moment so fragile it felt like glass, Mary whispered the words she had never said aloud before. "I love you, Jonah. But if you pull that trigger again, I'll hate you." The gun lowered a fraction. His eyes filled with something Mary hadn't seen in years, fear. Not of them. Of himself. For the first time that night, Jonah faltered. For a heartbeat, the weapon sagged in Jonah's grip. His knees trembled, his face pale, as if Mary's words had punctured the armor he had built around himself. The silence pressed in, heavy and fragile, holding its breath. But then something darker surged back. Jonah's expression hardened, twisting into something feral. His chest rose sharply, and a guttural cry tore from his throat. "No!" The weapon snapped up again, his finger white against the trigger. His eyes blazed with a fury so raw it was almost inhuman. "You don't get to hate me," he roared, his voice echoing through the corridor. "You don't get to stand there and judge me after everything they did to us, after everything I suffered while you just watched." The gun swung between them all, Michael slumped and bleeding, Elena shielding him, Mary standing exposed in the middle of the hallway. Mary flinched but didn't move. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes never left him. "Then shoot me," she whispered. If that's what's left of you, then end it here. Jonah's hand shook violently, the barrel trembling as he leveled it at her chest. His breath came ragged, every inhale a growl. For a second it seemed certain, he would pull the trigger, shatter everything, bury her love beneath his rage. But his body rebelled. His finger twitched, froze, twitched again. His whole frame shook, veins standing out on his neck. He let out another raw scream and fired, not at her. The shot slammed into the ceiling above, plaster raining down. The hallway rang with the thunder of it, a violent release of all the rage he couldn't turn on her. His chest heaved, his weapon dropping just a fraction as he staggered back, his face pale and drenched in sweat. His eyes darted wildly, his fury unspent but his will faltering. Behind Mary, Elena seized the moment. She surged forward, her voice a sharp blade, "Jonah! Look at what you've become. This isn't power, it's weakness. You can't even face the one person who loves you." Jonah's eyes snapped to her, blazing. With a snarl, he swung the weapon toward Elena. Mary screamed, "No!" The storm had returned, fiercer, more desperate, Jonah's fury burning bright as the fragile cracks in his resolve began to collapse. Jonah's eyes blazed as Elena's words cut into him. Weakness. The word throbbed in his skull like a hammer, louder than the screams, louder than Mary's sobbing. Weakness. He roared, a sound ripped from his chest like an animal's, and swung the weapon toward Elena. Elena's body stiffened, her instinct screaming to dive away, but she didn't move. She stood her ground, shielding Michael with her body. Her voice shook but did not falter. "If you're going to kill me, Jonah, do it looking me in the eyes." The words only stoked his fury. He lunged. The gun slammed against Elena's shoulder as he shoved her hard against the lockers. Metal rattled, her breath knocked out of her, but still she didn't scream. She stared straight at him, gasping, her jaw clenched in defiance. Jonah pressed the barrel of the weapon against her chest. The cold steel bit into her sternum. His breath was hot against her face, ragged, broken. "You think you're stronger than me?" he hissed. "You think you can stop this?" Elena's heart thundered, but she forced the words through her trembling lips. "I think you're terrified. Terrified of what happens when the gun is gone." Jonah's hand shook violently. The weapon wavered, pressing harder against her chest, then jerking away, then back again. His whole frame convulsed as though torn between two selves, the boy broken by silence and the man consumed by rage. Mary's voice cracked through the tension, shrill with panic, "Jonah, stop. Please." But he didn't hear her. His vision tunneled until only Elena existed, the woman who dared to look at him without fear, who dared to call him weak. With a guttural growl, he shoved her harder into the lockers, the weapon grazing up toward her throat. The edge of metal bit against her skin. Elena gasped, her voice raw but steady. "Do it, then. Prove you're nothing more than the monster you swore you'd never be." For a heartbeat, Jonah's finger tightened hard enough that one more ounce of pressure would end her. His entire body quaked with rage, veins bulging in his neck. Then, movement at the corner of his vision. Michael. Bleeding, barely conscious, but still alive. The priest's trembling hand clutched his crucifix, lifting it just inches off the floor. His lips moved soundlessly, whispering prayers through clenched teeth. The sight hit Jonah like a blade. That man should be dead. He should have silenced him. And yet he endured. Jonah screamed, wrenching back from Elena. Instead of pulling the trigger, he hurled her aside, her body crashing to the floor beside Michael. She groaned, clutching her shoulder, but her eyes remained locked on him, unbroken. Jonah staggered, his chest heaving, his weapon shaking violently in his hand. The fury hadn't left, it was growing, uncontrollable, blinding. He turned toward the chapel doors at the end of the hall. Toward escape or toward another massacre. Mary cried out behind him, her voice breaking, "Jonah!" But he didn't look back. The storm was pulling him deeper. Mary collapsed to her knees, the echo of Jonah's scream still reverberating through the hall. Her whole body shook as tears blurred her vision. The sharp smell of gunpowder lingered in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of fear. "Elena," she choked, scrambling toward her. Elena sat propped against the lockers, one hand gripping her bruised shoulder, her chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. Despite the pain, her eyes were sharp, locked on the chapel doors where Jonah had vanished. "He's heading for them," Elena rasped, forcing herself upright. Mary swallowed, her throat tight. "The students, oh God. We don't have time for God," Elena snapped, though her voice cracked with exhaustion. She pushed herself up with trembling arms. "We either stop him, or he kills every last one of them." Mary shook her head violently, pressing her palms to her face. "I can't. I tried, he won't listen to me anymore. I saw it in his eyes, he's gone." Elena grabbed her wrist, yanking her hands down. Their eyes locked, one burning with resolve, the other drowning in despair. "No," Elena said, her voice low and hard. "He's not gone. Not yet. You got through to him, Mary, you made him hesitate. He could have killed me, and he didn't. That hesitation is the only opening we've got." Mary's tears kept falling, but Elena's grip on her wrist anchored her. She wanted to believe her. She needed to. Behind them, Father Michael stirred weakly, blood seeping through his shirt. His cracked voice whispered, "You must stop him." The sight of him broken, bleeding, still praying, struck something deep in Mary's chest. For a moment, she saw not Jonah's fury but his pain, the boy she had laughed with, the boy who once told her he wanted to change the world, not burn it. Her sobs steadied into a shaking breath. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and nodded, just once. Elena released her wrist and leaned back against the wall, her eyes closing briefly as she fought to catch her breath. "Then it's settled," she whispered. "You and me. No more running." Mary looked at her, really looked at her. Elena was bruised, bleeding, terrified, but unbroken. That strength, that refusal to bow, gave Mary the sliver of courage she had thought lost. She turned toward the chapel doors, her fists clenching. "He's going to hear me," she said, her voice firmer than it had been all night. "Even if it kills me." Elena nodded grimly. "Then we do this together." The two women, one a teacher scarred but unyielding, the other a friend torn between love and horror, stood side by side in the dim corridor. Behind them, Michael whispered prayers. Ahead of them, Jonah's shadow stretched long and dark through the chapel doors. And between them all, the fragile, breaking thread of hope. The chapel doors slammed behind Jonah with a thunder that rattled the stained glass windows. The echo carried through the vaulted ceiling, and for a moment, silence swallowed the room. He stood in the aisle, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his brow, gun trembling in his hands. The chapel smelled of candle wax and old wood, but underneath, he swore he could smell smoke. His mind fed him illusions, flames licking the rafters, shadows twisting into shapes of all those who had mocked him, silenced him, cast him aside. The rows of pews stretched out before him like soldiers standing to attention. The altar glowed faintly in the dim light, its crucifix looming, the figure of Christ looking down as if in judgment. Jonah spat onto the marble floor. "Don't look at me like that," he snarled. "You didn't save me. You let me rot. You watched." His voice cracked, echoing off the high ceiling. His hands shook harder, the weight of the weapon growing unbearable. He lifted it toward the crucifix. For a moment, his rage focused into one clear thought: burn it all. His finger twitched on the trigger. But then, the faintest sound broke the silence. A sob. Jonah froze. His eyes snapped to the left. From behind the pews, two young students huddled together, their wide eyes shimmering with tears. They must have been hiding there since the lockdown. Their faces, innocent, terrified, stripped away the fire and left only raw silence in his chest. For a second, Jonah's arm faltered. His vision blurred. He saw himself reflected in those children, not as the destroyer he wanted to be, but as the broken boy he had always been. The weapon dipped. His breath hitched. And then the chapel doors creaked open behind him. Mary's voice rang out, trembling but clear. "Jonah, don't." He spun, his fury reigniting, the fragile moment snapping. Mary and Elena stood in the doorway, framed by the flickering light. Elena's hand braced against the doorframe, her body battered but defiant. Mary's face was streaked with tears, but her eyes shone with something unshakable. Jonah's chest heaved, torn between collapse and explosion. "You should have stayed away," he growled, his voice breaking, his gun rising once more. "You don't understand, I can't stop now." The crucifix loomed behind him. The children whimpered in the pews. Mary stepped forward anyway, her voice steady though her knees trembled. "Then let me stop you." The sobs of the children pierced the silence, fragile and trembling. Jonah's gaze darted between them and Mary, his weapon jerking in his hands as if torn by invisible strings. Elena saw the gun wavering. She didn't hesitate. With a grunt of pain, she pushed off the doorway, stumbling forward into the chapel. Her shoulders screamed in protest, her ribs burning from where he'd thrown her against the lockers, but she moved anyway, each step deliberate, unyielding. "Stay behind me," she hissed as she reached the pew where the children cowered. They pressed tighter together, wide-eyed, clutching each other's hands. Elena positioned herself in front of them, arms outstretched like a barrier of flesh and bone. Jonah's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenching. "Move, Elena. They don't matter. None of them matter." "They matter to me," she shot back, her voice sharp, ringing against the chapel walls. She straightened, ignoring the blood running down her arm. "You want to get to them? You'll have to go through me first." The gun snapped toward her chest, the barrel gleaming under the candlelight. Jonah's hand trembled, his finger grazing the trigger. Mary gasped behind him. "Elena!" But Elena didn't flinch. She stood taller, her chin raised. Her heart thundered, but her voice didn't break. "Do it, Jonah. Prove you're as hollow as you say. Kill the teacher who stood between you and children half your size. See if it fills the hole in your chest." Jonah staggered a step backward, his lips pulling into a snarl. The weapon shook, his breath ragged. He could almost feel the recoil already, hear the shot, see her body fall. But his body wouldn't move. His hands refused him. His fury screamed for release, but something deeper, older, ached at the sight of her defiance. Elena's eyes softened, her voice quieter now. "Because the truth is you don't want to kill me. You don't want to kill them. You just don't know what else to do with the pain." Her words cracked against him harder than any bullet. He staggered, the weapon dipping just slightly, his free hand clutching his temple. Mary took a step forward, her voice trembling with urgency. "Jonah, listen to her, please." But Jonah roared, raising the gun again, his fury reigniting, tearing through the cracks. "Shut up. Both of you." The children whimpered. Elena braced herself, her arms still spread wide. And Mary knew, this was it. If she didn't step in now, Jonah's storm would consume them all. Mary stepped forward, her voice no longer trembling, no longer soft. It was sharp, raw, and filled with fire. "Enough, Jonah," she shouted, her words ricocheting through the chapel like gunfire. "You think you're powerful because you're pointing a gun at children? At teachers? At the same man who once tried to save you?" Jonah's head snapped toward her, fury blazing. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she spat. Her eyes locked on his, unflinching, her tears replaced with steel. "You're not some warrior. You're not a savior. You're a coward hiding behind a weapon because you're too afraid to face the boy you used to be." The words hit like a slap. Jonah's body jerked, his grip tightening on the gun. His lips curled, but no sound came. Mary pressed on, her voice rising, each word like a hammer blow. "You talk about pain. We all have pain. But instead of fighting through it, you're ready to drag everyone else into your misery. You call this strength? No, Jonah, it's a weakness. The purest, ugliest kind of weakness." The children whimpered behind Elena, but Mary didn't stop. She stepped closer, her eyes blazing with fury and grief. You want to burn the world down because it hurts you? Fine. But don't you dare stand there and pretend it's noble. Don't you dare call it justice. This isn't justice, it's selfishness. You're not cleansing anything. You're just proving everyone right whoever said you'd end up broken. Jonah's hand shook violently. The weapon wavered between Mary and Elena, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Rage and shame battled across his face, the mask cracking. Mary took one more step, her voice a sharp whisper now. Look at me, Jonah. Look at me. If you pull that trigger, you don't become a martyr. You don't become a hero. You just become another coward with blood on his hands. Silence crashed into the chapel. Jonah's chest heaved, his jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. His vision blurred as tears mixed with sweat. The weight of her words pressed down on him, heavier than the gun itself. For the first time, his arm began to lower not from hesitation, but from the crushing truth that he couldn't outrun. Mary's eyes never left his. So go ahead. Shoot me if you think it makes you strong. But deep down, you and I both know you've already lost. Jonah's finger froze on the trigger. His whole body shook, every ounce of fury threatening to collapse into something else entirely. Jonah's face twisted, veins standing out on his neck, eyes bloodshot with rage and shame. Mary's words clawed at him like knives, each one deeper than the last. Coward. Weakness. Already lost. Something inside him snapped. With a guttural scream, he jerked the gun back up, the barrel locking onto Mary's chest. I said shut up, he roared, spittle flying, his whole body trembling with fury. His fingers slammed harder against the trigger. But Elena lunged. She threw herself sideways, ramming her injured shoulder into Jonah's arm. The gun fired. The crack split the chapel, deafening. Glass shattered high above as the bullet ripped into the stained glass window, sending shards raining down like colored fire. The children shrieked and ducked behind the pews. Jonah snarled, shoving Elena back with terrifying strength. She stumbled, crashing onto the marble floor, her hands scraping raw against the stone. Mary didn't move. She stood frozen, her chest rising and falling, her eyes locked on Jonah's. His hand shook violently, rage consuming him. He advanced on her in stumbling steps, the gun jerking toward her once more. You think you can take this from me? You think you can strip me bare in front of them? His voice cracked into madness. I'll show you what power looks like. Another shot exploded. This time, it missed her by inches, the bullet slamming into the crucifix above the altar. The wooden Christ splintered, the figure crashing to the ground in a thunderous fall. The chapel filled with smoke, dust, and the acrid sting of gunpowder. Jonah's chest heaved, his eyes wild, almost glowing with fury. He staggered back a step, then forward again, as though torn between shooting her and collapsing entirely. His whole body shook, the storm inside tearing itself apart. Mary didn't retreat. Her voice cut through the chaos, harsh and unyielding. Go on then. Do it. Show them all that this is who Jonah became, a murderer with nothing left but rage. Jonah screamed, a sound so raw it barely sounded human. He lifted the gun again, his last, desperate act of defiance, of clinging to the only thing that made him feel alive. And in that moment, he looked utterly broken. The echo of the last gunshot still hung in the chapel, smoke drifting lazily toward the rafters. Shards of stained glass glittered on the marble floor, scattered like fallen stars. Jonah stood in the middle of it all, trembling, his chest heaving, the gun still raised but heavy in his hand. His face twisted in fury, then in confusion, then in something hollow and lost. Mary didn't move. She stood before him, unflinching, her words still hanging in the air. This is who Jonah became, a murderer with nothing left but rage. The gun wavered. His arms felt like stone. His knees buckled beneath him. And then, finally, it broke. Jonah's scream tore from his throat, a sound of rage, grief, and despair all tangled together. His grip failed, and the gun clattered to the marble floor, skittering across the aisle until it struck a pew with a hollow thud. He collapsed after it, his knees hitting hard, his hands clutching his hair as sobs racked his body. "I didn't want this," he wailed, his voice raw, cracking. "I didn't, God, I didn't mean for it to be this." His fists slammed against the floor. Why won't it stop hurting? Why won't it ever stop? The children peeked from behind the pews, their eyes wide and wet. Elena, gasping on the floor, watched through pain and exhaustion, her face softening. Mary stepped closer, her steps slow, steady. She didn't speak at first. She only knelt in front of him, lowering herself into his storm of grief. Jonah lifted his face, streaked with tears and sweat, his eyes red and wild. "You don't understand," he whispered hoarsely. "You all left me. You let me rot. And now, I don't know who I am anymore." Mary's voice trembled but didn't falter. "You're Jonah. You're the boy I knew. The one who laughed at stupid jokes, who wanted more from life than pain. That boy isn't gone, Jonah, but you've been burying him under all this hate." Jonah shook his head violently, sobs tearing from him. "I can't go back. I can't." "You don't have to go back," Mary said softly. "You just have to stop running from yourself." For a long, breaking moment, he stared at her, his sobs choking into silence. His body slumped forward, his forehead pressing against her shoulder as tears soaked her shirt. Mary wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight even as he trembled like a child in her grasp. Behind them, Elena lowered her head, relief flooding her like a tidal wave. Father Michael's faint whisper carried across the chapel from the doorway. "Even the lost can be found." And at last, Jonah's storm was quiet. The chapel was still, save for the sound of Jonah's sobs and the faint drip of wax from half-burnt candles. The chaos, the gunfire, the screams, the shattering glass felt distant now, like thunder moving off into another valley. Jonah clung to Mary's shoulder, his body shaking, his voice reduced to broken whispers. "I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to be anything else." Mary stroked his hair gently, her own tears falling freely. "You don't have to know right now. You just have to let someone help you. Let us help you." Across the aisle, Elena pushed herself upright with a groan. Her bruised ribs screamed in protest, but her eyes softened as she watched Jonah no longer a monster, but a boy shattered by his own storm. "You almost destroyed everything," she said, her tone sharp but not cruel. "But you didn't. And that means there's still something in you worth saving." Jonah lifted his head, shame flooding his face. He couldn't meet her eyes. "I hurt you. God, I almost." Elena cut him off, her voice steady. "Yes. But almost nothing is the same as done. Remember that." From the back of the chapel came a soft groan. Father Michael, pale and weak, leaned against the doorframe, one hand clutching his side where the blood seeped through his shirt. His crucifix dangled from his other hand, glinting faintly in the candlelight. "Jonah," he rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. Jonah turned, his breath catching. His face crumpled as the weight of recognition struck him. The man he had blamed, hated, targeted is still alive. Still here. "I should have killed you," Jonah whispered hoarsely, guilt choking him. Father Michael's gaze was tired but unflinching. "But you didn't. And that means, the boy I once knew is still there. The one who wanted more than hate." Jonah's tears spilled again, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve forgiveness." Michael closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, his lips trembling with pain. "Forgiveness isn't deserved. It's given. And I give it freely, Jonah." The words struck him harder than any bullet. His body shook, his breath hitching as something inside finally loosened. He collapsed forward again, this time toward Michael, as if the man's frail form carried the only weight that could anchor him now. Mary and Elena exchanged a glance, both exhausted, both scarred, but both knowing this was the moment Jonah had been running from all along. For the first time in years, the chapel felt like a sanctuary again. Not because it was safe, but because inside its broken walls, Amidst blood and shattered glass, forgiveness and love still lived. And in that quiet after the storm, they all sat together, wounded, weary, but alive. The chapel had been repaired. The shattered stained glass window was boarded up, waiting for artisans to replace its colors. The bullet scars in the marble had been filled, though faint cracks remained like veins running through stone. Life in the school crept back slowly. The children whispered about that night in hushed tones, their voices carrying both fear and awe. Teachers walked the halls with tighter smiles, their eyes sharper, more protective. Mary sat at her desk, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. A notebook lay open before her, not Jonah's this time, but hers. Pages filled with sketches of fire, fragments of prayers, and words she had been too afraid to write before. He was broken, but not beyond reach. Across the classroom, Elena leaned against the windowsill, her shoulders still bandaged, her ribs still aching. But she was alive. Strong. Unshaken in the ways that mattered most. When her eyes met Mary's, there was no need for words. They had stood in the storm together, and that bond would never break. At the hospital across town, Father Michael rested in a quiet room, sunlight streaming across his bed. The wound in his side still throbbed, but he bore it with the patience of a man who had already carried greater pain. His rosary lay on the table beside him, worn smooth from constant touch. When nurses asked how he survived, he only smiled faintly and said, "Because he didn't finish what he started." And Jonah? Jonah sat in a holding cell, the fluorescent light humming above him. His hands trembled as he pressed a crumpled tissue to his eyes. No gun, no fire, no mask of rage, just a boy with hollow eyes, staring at the floor as if it might swallow him whole. But sometimes, when the silence pressed too heavy, he remembered Mary's arms around him, Elena's defiance, Michael's words, "Forgiveness isn't deserved. It's given." He didn't know what forgiveness meant yet. He didn't know if he could ever forgive himself. But for the first time, he wasn't running from the thought. The world outside moved on, scarred but breathing. The school held classes again. The church bells rang. And in those fractured, imperfect sounds, there was a reminder that even in the wake of violence, life could rebuild. Mary wrote the final line in her notebook and closed it gently. Even in the darkest storm, there are fragments of light. Enough to find the way back.